that tells a story is a form of self-expression by the author, no matter what media it is. Be it a song, a photo-bashed collage, or a cartoon about furry hell. As of late, some things in media have been labeled as too much to be shown, however, way more often than in the past. No matter the author's intent, desires, or goals with making their media. But is that right? Should some topics be entirely barred from mention for being too dark or heavy, no matter what the story is trying to tell? Are some things always going to be handled quote-unquote poorly, no matter how they are depicted? Hey ya, hiya, ho ya out there to all my big brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles, and of course, mommies, daddies, siblings, and guardians. It's me, your bite-sized baddie and favorite little brother Mark, and you might be able to hear it in my voice a little bit, but I am still kind of sick. I'm recovering as best I can, but my throat might be a little bit scratchy, so sorry in advance. Getting down to brass tacks, I'm, not a Vivzy Pop hater, but I am far from a stan. I enjoy Helva Boss, but if I'm being honest, Hazbin has never really been my big favorite. The show that came out is alright, if not a little bit too fast-paced for my liking, and I'll probably never get rid of the tiny resentment in my heart for Viv that I got from my friends who had the displeasure of going to art school with her, and experiencing her at her worst. But with that being said, I feel like a lot of the criticism that the show's most controversial episode received is a bit unwarranted. Likely because even though the show is intended for an adult audience with fully formed frontal lobes, many of its most avid fans are teens and kids who aren't equipped to unpack the themes shown to them yet. Though there are certainly a number of adults that I've seen talking about this specific episode that seem to just be parroting off of one another without having actually watched the content itself. I'm all for not watching something when you feel it might trigger you. If you do that, however, you can't really talk about what is or isn't involved in the content from a place of anything but ignorance. So, if you're going to base your opinions off of someone else's, maybe you could take some snippets from someone who has a degree in film and spent 4 years straight doing media analysis for a grade. Trigger warning for the video. We will be talking about Hazbin Hotel Episode 4 Masquerade, which means this video will heavily mention topics of SA, abuse, dubious consent, and even drug use. I'll be handling these topics with as much tact as I can, but if you think that would be too much for you, please feel free to click off. I'll see you in the next video with a much lighter subject. What do I mean by dark content? Things that you see in media for more mature readers, such as violence, sex, psychological and physical abuse, and even racism and torture fall into this category of dark content. You know, the things that those ratings that appear in the top left-hand corner of TV shows are there to warn you about. Things that are, a little bit worse than a villain tying someone to the railroad tracks. Something that's supposed to make your skin crawl and make you feel uneasy. Today, we're specifically focusing on SA, which is a type of darker plotline that I have some complex feelings surrounding when it's shown in film and TV. To answer my own question point blank, I don't think that anything should be entirely barred from being shown in media. As long as it's rated properly, I think that anyone can tell just about any story that they want to. However, I think dark topics really need to be handled with the respect and gravity that they deserve. One shouldn't romanticize or glamorize it, not like how people said Dolly Guts was romanticizing scars just because they drew their character with scars and made vent art, but like in 50 Shades of Grey, where the main character is just very manipulative and abusive towards his girlfriend, but it's shown as some act of being manly and domineering and romantic. Or how many older boy love series would depict SA as an act of romance. They simply loved their uke too much and couldn't stop themselves. An author can include dark topics for any reasons, not just as a way to vent their own traumas, since that's the caveat that a lot of people place in this sort of thing, but it shouldn't just be for shock value, because that cheapens the overall message of your story. There's always a debate on what's glamorizing and romanticizing, and what is just being read incorrectly by the media illiterate. What's important is that whatever your argument and interpretation is, needs to be backed up with evidence from the text and even subtext of the piece of media. It's always important as someone who produces or consumes media to actually think critically about what you're seeing. Essay is so often used as a tool for a male protagonist's growth or for pity bait. You know, my partner was R-worded, so I'm going to show how much man pain I have by being super possessive over them, or by beating the offender up, but not really helping my partner address what happened. I'm so macho. Don't do that. Or on the other side of the coin, a lot of the time when it happens, it's never addressed, especially when inexperienced writers try using this as a plot device. It's hard to show how something so violating impacts a character without going too far to one side or the other. You risk either woobifying your character and making them hyper pitiful to where no one can take it seriously, or being so dark about it that the audience also can't take the story seriously because it's absurd. Essay affects different people differently, but it is scarring to everyone that it happens to. It should be written with care, not just as a way to make you like a romantic lead more, either by having their partner raped and them showing up to comfort them, or having them go get revenge on the person for defiling their lover. While a lot of people confuse that for romanticizing essay, and while that's an entirely different can of worms, it is certainly trivializing it. Again, romanticizing essay is like this one book I saw advertised on Book Talk the other day. Not to name names, but the plot was summed up as serial killer murders everyone around the woman he believes to be his fated mate, rationalizes the murders to her by saying the men were going to assault her, and then talks about how he assaulted her in her sleep to impregnate her. But it's okay, because they're fated mates! It was listed as a dark romance, but to me, that is a psychological horror. Personally, it is very hard for me to enjoy stories where essay is a big plotline from my own personal experiences, and how often it's improperly handled. But that doesn't make it inherently bad or vile media. Many depictions tend to be gratuitous, unnecessary, and, honestly, easily replaced with a different conflict. It was just the easiest plot point to get the most emotional response from an audience. It's cheap. However, there are ways to make it more impactful to the story and not just an accessory. One depiction that I found more agreeable as an actual plot point of import was how it was dealt with in the show The Magicians. There are two instances within, one being CSA and one being between adults. Both are shown to have extremely negative effects, with the perpetrators being heavily condemned with absolutely zero remorse or the common "but he's not that bad" isms or attempts to redeem the attackers later. Neither events are used to further romance plots, neither are used to further different or unaffected characters' arcs in the need to avenge or destroy the person responsible. Rather, both survivors' experiences add to their own arcs, characters, and who they are for the rest of the show in contrasting ways. It isn't a fleeting plot point for some third party's advancement or to take someone down a peg like you see a lot in media. It's uncomfortable, it's vile, and it's a bit of dark content that is handled more respectfully than most times. Sure, it's not perfect, but honestly, I don't think any depiction of essay can be handled in a perfect way. When it comes to Hazbin Hotel, I feel quite similarly. Let's delve into why so many people were crying out about episode 4. One large reason it was flamed was that it came to light that one of the storyboard artists for the assault scenes has a certain affinity for that kind of ship dynamic. The artist in question has never tried to hide the fact and is pretty openly a pro-shipper if you want to use those terms. And Vivzy Pop's reaction to this situation didn't really help, with her saying that if you don't support all victims in how they depict their trauma, then you don't support any victims. Only for the artist to come out and say, "I'm not an essay survivor, but..." Whether she meant that in relation to the artist, herself, or some other member of the staff, it really doesn't add anything to the situation. Setting aside the fact that people who have been victims of certain abuse are not necessarily going to always be the best at depicting it, and from personal experience when overcoming my own traumas, at times have a skewed relationship with their trauma that can tend to make their understanding of how things should be versus how things happen to them, that make their depictions accidentally worse, it's a weird look to be publicly thirsting over horny art of a rapist and the man whose soul he owns, when in your show the message is very obviously anti that. But even if the storyboarder does have a non-con fetish, does that mean the depiction within the show is, like, negated? I'm not one of those fiction doesn't affect reality people, because if that were the case, no country would ever make propaganda films painting wartime atrocities in a positive light, or propaganda shows where the citizens are painted as evil and inherently guilty for expressing their civil rights. However, I think it's most important to look at the actual text and subtext within the show, in this case. Unanimously, Valentino is painted as bad, and Angel Dust is painted as sympathetic and traumatized. The show doesn't lose all moral value, and its message isn't lost just because one storyboard artist gets butterflies over seeing Angel Dust in a collar that Valentino holds the leash to. Like, I'm not going to yuck their yums here, because fortunately their yums aren't being depicted on screen. Dark media is supposed to make you think depthfully about what is going on within the media you consume and within the world around you. And yes, that does include thinking about the author and their end goal with creating something. I'm glad they didn't go grimdark or make the assault so egregious that they looped back around to being comical, considering that it's a comedy cartoon, because that's a pitfall many authors really fall into in cases like this. This is a situation that really requires nuance. While a creator's beliefs do influence their creation, in this case, it's not like this person was the only one making the episode or the storyboards. Many artists worked on this episode from writing to boarding to animation. So luckily, if the artist in question was a dubcon-loving maniac, which I'm not saying they are, there would be plenty of people along the way to say, hey, whoa, we're not gonna animate that. When people were making a huge fanfare about this fetishist making the episode and the scenes being so graphic and terrible, I was expecting something, well, really graphic and terrible. But Masquerade, in my opinion, was not all it was hyped up to be. Not to say that if you were triggered by it, then you're invalid. As I said, different things affect different people differently. This music video about cartoon hell was no Flowers of War rape scene, however. And that is what I would call extremely dark and scarring enough to quite literally trauma bond me with the 15 other students I watched that film with in class. Trying to keep my own biases in mind, however, my bar for what is horrific to see without it becoming gratuitous is very much further down the road than what I expect most other people to view as egregious. Perhaps the lamentations of it being horrible and the worst thing so many had ever seen set my expectations too high for violence, which left me pleasantly surprised when it wasn't that. Like, a sigh of relief. Whether that's the case or not, it doesn't really change the episode and music video or overall story's content, however. All of the consent within this episode is dubious at best. That's enough to be a chilling thought on its own. Then, the way Valentino manhandles Angel Dust while still sneaking in a grope is disgusting, but not framed in a sexually gratifying way for the audience. The repulsion you feel over seeing it happen is supposed to be there. As for the Poison music video itself, to me, it smacks of Angel Dust having a dissociative episode, as what we see in the background happens to him in the real world. The assault isn't glamorized, but the K-pop-esque dance number feels like a way for Angel to rationalize and handle what's happening to him as best he can. Psychologically speaking, once your brain learns how to dissociate, it becomes easier and easier to do so. It becomes your brain's default coping mechanism for when things get very bad. As quoted from psychiatry.org, dissociation is a disconnection between a person's thoughts, memories, feelings, actions, or sense of who he or she is. This seems like a perfect example of what's going on during the musical number. Angel is undergoing something physically and mentally traumatic that he does not want to do, but literally can't not do. Even the song's lyrics, I got so good at being untrue. I got so good at telling you what you want to hear. I dissociate, disappear, literally highlights this fact. His expressions of pain and anger and fear and even disgust show through plain as day. And being that he's the episode's focus and thus the character we, as an audience, are meant to superimpose ourselves onto, we share and empathize with his feelings even more. Even his lyrics explaining his toxic relationship with Valentino as poison he chose, that he blames himself for being trapped by, furthers the idea, especially when you consider the abusive nature of their arrangement, with Valentino literally owning Angel Dust's soul, and Angel not being able to deny him. It reframes his entire career as a sex worker. Did he ever want to be in the adult film industry, or did Valentino decide that was what he was good for? Sure, we see that Angel himself is a very sexual character, but we also see him quite obviously code-switching between feeling down about what happened and putting on the facade of flirting and flaunting himself before Husk. Content like this is meant to affect and impact you. This music video, in a way that's not horribly graphic, still does the job of describing Angel's feelings and inner turmoil as he undergoes this near nightly abuse. The episode doesn't hit the main don'ts that I listed above whatsoever, in my opinion. The episode actively moved the character's own arc forward, Angel's the one being centered. Even though Charlie's having her rich white girl saves the poor's moment, it's squashed by Angel Dust under fear of Charlie getting somehow mixed up with Valentino the same way that he is, which again centers him in the story. His thoughts and feelings are what is being explored. The assault and what comes after it, and seeing how his friends care, is a big proponent for what drives him to want to escape Valentino. There's not a romantic interest or the preppy savior of the episode meant to rescue him, but rather a support system that's there to encourage him to save himself from the situation. You can't help someone who doesn't want help or even acknowledge that they need it. It's self-actualization for Angel to realize that he does have worth aside from being a sexual object, and a push so that he can see that others care for him as a person and not just some sex symbol. Arguably, there are romantic elements to the episode with Husk, but they aren't the main focus, as in, say, how Lore Olympus treats the rape of Persephone. That is treated almost explicitly as, ooh, how will Hades react when she tells him? How will this affect him? When will she tell him? Where all the options revolve around how the male leading romance option feels instead of what lasting effects this has on Persephone, or how it'll affect her for the remainder of her immortal life. It's done yet again to make Hades seem like a wonderful option and promote their relationship instead of treating Persephone like an actualized woman of her own. The scene itself was very respectfully portrayed, similarly to the music video, as an internal dialogue Persephone has while she dissociates during the attack. But that doesn't change the fact that the narrative function is the trope of have girl be assaulted so the male character can have character growth eventually. With that being said, do I find the Hazbin Hotel essay storyline well done? In my opinion, it's done better than a lot of other media that have this as an element within it. Right up there with The Magicians Season 4, as I mentioned earlier. Even down to Angel Dust being frustrated about Husk not wanting to sleep with him after the assault has taken place highlights his mental state, because he's come to define his self-worth by his ability to be sexual with others. The overt message of the show has Angel Dust saying that he wants to be broken, so that Valentino no longer finds him appealing enough to be his favorite toy to play with. But if we go one step further into the sort of subtext of the show, Angel puts himself in harm's way of being roofied because he wants the validation of feeling worth something, but he doesn't want to actually be in control of that part of himself yet. He's been too hurt, and he's just not ready yet. It's only when he's confronted with the fact that, yeah, you are broken and a loser just like me and everyone else in hell, but that doesn't make you unworthy of being a living thing, that he starts to come to terms with the fact that, yeah, he can want more for himself. He's allowed to want to be out from Valentino's thumb without having to break himself to seem undesirable. He's allowed to want to be a human being. Or I guess a demon being. There's always room for improvement, but I do not think this was the fetishized garbage everyone on TikTok and Twitter were making it out to be. Just because there are sexual elements within the musical number about a spider sex worker coming to terms with being abused and crying out to the universe to get him out, whether that be through death or self-destruction, I don't think that makes the entire work itself done as a fetish. It was uncomfortable to watch, and that's how it's supposed to work. You're not supposed to feel comfy cozy while someone is lamenting about their abuse and supposedly being sexually assaulted in the background visuals. You're supposed to feel uncomfortable and empathetic. And this episode, I believe, achieved that without going into the grimdark or shock value territory that shows like Goblin Slayer often do to try and elicit the same response. At the end of the day, Hazbin Hotel is a dark comedy that at times can go a bit too far, especially if you are looking at the actions of the staff alongside the show's content. But with that in mind, the show's artistic value and message of redemption are not diminished by one or two weird people on the animation team. It's up to the viewer to decide where to draw the line at what morals, content, and people that they want to support, and whether foregoing an entire production is worth not supporting one person. To be entirely frank, I was extremely nervous to make this video. I felt like it was too hot of a take while being simultaneously ice cold. Ultimately, it was Apollo who encouraged me to actually finish it. Their words really stuck with me. If it makes me this nervous to say, then that probably means I should say it even louder because someone out there probably needs to hear it. I think that can apply to this episode as well. Somewhere out there, someone probably saw this episode and had the spark of an aha moment or otherwise could connect with what Angel is going through. We're all losers. We all have our own trauma and weird relationships with self-worth and feeling worthy of those around us. But just because you've been battered and shattered and bruised and abused, that does not make you any less worthy of autonomy, dignity, or care. What do you think, though? Have you watched the entire Hazbin Hotel show, and what was your take on it? How was the pacing in your opinion? Was it too fast, or was it just right?
Would you like to hear me cover any other shows specifically?
Let me know in the comments down below. And like the video if you liked it. Remember to subscribe. We're going to be doing an art giveaway when we reach 3K subscribers, so I'd really appreciate the help. And I also really appreciate my one-dabulicious Patreon supporters. At our brother, sibling, sister tier, we have Viri, Miss Mercuriel, Minnow, Echo Foxtrot, and Ash Valentine. At our Mommies, Daddies, and Guardians tier, we have Mary, Kiria Makoto, and Kai. And at our Gods, Goddesses, and Deities tier, we have Gods and Punks. I appreciate you guys, munches and bunches. I appreciate you for getting to the end of this video. Leave a fire emoji if you made it this far into the video. That way I'll know the real ones. And I hope you have a scrab-dangulous day. Bye-bye.